of huge pulls with some high risks. So before they get into it, we got Halls of Atonement to start us off. 4 Danes, 1 Swede, and Baguette, both facing elimination as Halls of Atonement gets underway.
All right, well, let's look what they have for us here as they seem to be having a very interesting comp on 4 Danes, 1 Swede side. They have that Elemental Shaman on their group with that Frost Mage as well. Baguette, on the other hand, is running a little bit more of a physical comp as they're running the Windwalker and the Rogue plus the Frost Mage.
I'm honestly quite surprised we didn't see a Warlock here again this week, because it was last week we did see in Halls of Atonement Warlocks coming in doing insane damage with these big pulls. I know Warlock did 24k DPS overall, so it's quite interesting to not see a Warlock here and just bring out these different comps, but even the Ellie Shaman to bring that out, which will be good for big pulls as well, so it's interesting seeing these comps.
Yeah, I agree. I think Warlock was really impressive when I saw Shella playing that Destruction Warlock, just doing that huge burst to start, and it really makes sense in this dungeon. And yeah, it looks like they're both of them went to the right side first, which is something that we don't see in the MDI that often. A lot of the times we see them go left, pull those 2 shards on top of each other, and then commit the Bloodlust. But it looked like maybe that was not their plan. Maybe it has something to do with it being just the night right now, because apparently it got really dark. As Demon goes down for 4 Danes, 1 Swede. Oh no, they do have a Battle Rest available, but they only have an Engineering Rest they can use, and no one is able to get it back up. So this might just be a full team wipe for 4 Danes, 1 Swede. And it looks like they didn't get any trash down there either.
Baguette seems to have done pretty well in their pull. There's a bit of Sanguine there, which healed the mobs a little bit, but didn't seem to deter them too much, and I think they're taking down the packs pretty quickly, especially because they didn't wipe as well. So I think they're on to the next pack now after picking their powers.
Yeah, everyone picked up that Anima power. It's all gonna be on Baguette now, since they are the team. It looked like they definitely went a bit slower. If you look at the percentage, they're up to 18%. So just 2% ahead, even though 4 Danes, 1 Swede had this full wipe. So going a bit slower for sure, but it works out, right? If you're in this lower bracket and you're playing against these lower seeded teams, sometimes it's just smarter to go with a little bit of a less risky pull, and hopefully you're just not making those mistakes. 4 Danes, 1 Swede, on the other hand, they just went in doing that same pull again that they just wiped to, and unfortunately they just wiped to it again. Herudra not looking too happy in that bottom left side of the screen.
No, and as you can see, like on Baguette's side, the tank is actually kiting the shard really well, and Ring comes out as well to push the mobs back, because you have to remember it's Sanguine, so you don't want these mobs to die underneath the shard, because the shard is going to sit there and cast Thrash. So it'd be awful if the mobs died under the shard and just healed it to full with Sanguine. So it's a very good job by the tank here, just kiting along with using the Monk CC as well.
Yeah, definitely nice usage of utility here by Baguette. And yeah, again, just taking it a little bit slower, but it's working out for them. Clearly, as they're up to 30% now. Houndmaster sitting a little bit in that Sanguine. Houndmasters usually are those mobs that are just really, really annoying to get around, because they're not really moving, they're just standing there casting stuff that can't really be interrupted. So you need to use, either you need to go line of sight, so the mob comes to you, or you need to hope that the mob jumps out of the Sanguine. Sometimes they do that, but sometimes they also jump into the Sanguine, which of course is not what you want. But now they're moving on into that left side of the dungeon. Still 1 shard left that they have to do.
If you look at 4 Danes, 1 Swede, they're actually still quite deep into this pull, and I'm pretty sure they have no wings. Dash has just actually gone down. He had no block or anything like that, and all their cooldowns are starting to go down, and I think Demon's just used Matter here to try and keep that alive as well, but it doesn't seem like an easy pull for them. Even Demon just died again, so they've died to the same pack. They've killed quite a bit of mobs, but still dying to the same pack over again is really not great, especially as they have 12 deaths, which is 60 seconds onto the timer.
Yeah, and they managed to get that Engineering Rest off on Demon, somehow miraculously getting that tank back up, so they might be able to finish this off. But definitely just a huge amount of time loss, unfortunately, with those 14 deaths now on the board. Baguette, on the other hand, doing a lot better. They're still on 0 deaths, so having a completely clean run so far. And you can see their Vengeance Demon Hunter. He's not even tanking those mobs. He's just making sure he's running away. Of course, they have the Frost Mage, who is just slowing those mobs for the tank. So he can just run around, making sure he doesn't get those necrotic stacks, or at least he's making sure that he can reset them whenever they go too high.
Yeah, as you see, I think they had the Houndmaster blind in the back, that could have been potentially to stop the mobs from casting and empowering those dogs. So I think that's a good way to do it. And as you can see here, they're just taking down and making sure to keep them split, so they're not going to be standing sanguine.
Yeah, definitely don't want to have any of that heals go off. We'll see how they deal with the Sanguine later on, if they decide to pull any trash on top of the bosses. That is definitely something we've seen teams do yesterday. Just maybe not so great success, though. So we'll see if Baguette is trying that, as so far they haven't. They have only done that one Tormentor. You can see 1 out of 4 Tormentor buffs on the right side of the screen. You can see that. You can also check out which kind of Tormentor buffs they took. If you open up that MDI.gcd.tv tool, you can check which power state, Tormentor power state took. Sometimes we see a lot of teams pick up that bolstering power if they decide to pull a lot of trash onto the boss, right? Because it makes sense that you get that bolstering for the boss DPS, especially in these high keys, and especially if you pull a lot of trash onto the bosses, then it just gives you that extra little bit of damage for the single target DPS, just speeding up those dungeons quite a lot.
Absolutely, but it does definitely increase the risk of these pulls, though. Like, as you can see, like in some groups, they do go for the safer pulls and the safer routes, making sure that even though it's not the quickest time, they're actually getting it done and making sure it's not so much risk involved. But then you do see other teams who are going to pull all of it with the boss, and there's so much higher risk of dying, or even like with these affixes, like you said, like in the necrotic, they need to burn down all these ads on the boss, otherwise the tank's going to die if they can't reset their stacks, which was probably pretty difficult in this first boss, because if they move out of the area, they get feared. So it's obviously like keeping that in mind, having CDs and stuff ready for that, and just paying attention to that when you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that that pull that some of the MDI teams do on this first boss is some of the craziest pulls ever, because it almost looks easy when they pull it off, but it's so difficult just because the area that you have to actually move around is so small. And then you get that beam, and then you have the Sanguine on the floor, and then the tank has like 50 necrotic stacks, and it's just crazy to me on how those teams manage so many things with such little space that they have. It looks like they're pulling the middle pack plus the side pack here with the double Stoneborn gargoyles as well that they mind controlled with that Venthyr Covenant. So now definitely keep an eye on how they deal with the Sanguine here. Look at Halkia's HP. Let's see if any of those heals of the Sanguine go off on the boss.
They don't have bloodlust here, so this is also going to be a little bit scary for teams, especially even though they have the Goliath, which do give a DR, it's still going to be very difficult, especially as the things start dropping and they're going to have to move a lot. And on 4 games on Swede, they don't seem to be having a great time here. It seems like their health keys are dropping significantly and they're struggling to do it. Wings is down as well, and the incinerating damage is just taking them down here. And then Demon's even just gone down here, so I'm surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if they're about to have a full wipe from the team.
Yeah, just things not going their way, unfortunately, for the Danes and the Swedes. Baguette, though, seem to be dealing with this pull pretty well. They actually got all of the trash done that they pulled initially onto the boss. There was, I think, 1 or 2 ticks of Sanguine actually went off on Halkias, unfortunately. But then afterwards they managed to drag the boss out of it. So they shouldn't have lost too much time. Of course, he would rather have no heals go off on the boss at all. But at least he didn't heal to full HP, right? And now they're pulling some extra groundskeepers onto Halkias as well, making sure they're kiting the boss backwards to not have any of those pulls drop underneath the boss.
I think that was super clean, especially because of how hard that pull was. They didn't have any lust or anything like that, so I think they did that really well, especially with the affixes that they have to be able to manage the Sanguine and the necrotic stacks. And it seems like they're stealthing here to go to the second boss, which is quite a usual thing that you see. You don't usually do this pass here. So it'll be interesting to see if they use Ashen on this boss potentially as Wings is coming up, which will be really helpful for the ads that come out and obviously cast and do a lot of damage during the phases.
Yeah, I definitely think that Ashen timings are pretty important for especially these shorter dungeons, because these MDI teams are clearing those dungeons so quickly that you only manage to fit in like 3 or 4 Ashens into the dungeon. So you definitely want to make sure you assign that properly. It looks like all of the cooldowns are being popped. Of course, Bloodlust not available just yet. They're probably going to be saving that for the last boss. And then another thing to note is that they only have 1 Curse Dispel in their group. It's only the mage who can dispel it on Baguette's side, well, 4 Danes, 1 Swede, they have the Elemental Shaman as well that can dispel it. So they have 2 people who can get rid of that curse, making sure that 2 people are not actually getting stunned by that debuff that is getting applied. And usually you want to dispel the person that has the leap on them, so they can actually dodge the bleed that happens afterwards. If you're quick enough, then you can just get out of the impact zone of the boss. There we go. You saw Tiefpass just do it on this Demon Hunter. He leaped away just as the boss was hitting that point, and he didn't get the bleed on him.
Yeah, so I think that they're pulling this in now, and they're seeing that, and there's lots of damage going out when these mobs die. They do an explosive damage, so you have to be careful not to kill them all, to do it all quickly, because if you kill them at once, you could drop very low, and it could be very risky, especially with the stun coming out. You're not going to be able to top them or anything like that. So as you can see here, he's making sure to get all the Stone Fiends in on the smash, and then jumping out of it quickly to make sure he gets rid of all those adds.
Yeah, definitely doing a good job dealing with Echelon here, and afterwards, there's still gonna be some tricky moments for Baguette, depending on if they decide to pull the trash on top of the boss or not. We've seen different kinds of approaches from other teams before. Looks like they're dealing with Baruth by himself. Baruth, we've seen a team skip Baruth here in this dungeon and deal with the 50% healing debuff in the last boss, but it's not good. Like, it's definitely difficult to deal with that debuff. So it looks like Baguette is going with the safer choice and just dealing with Baruth. But you can see, of course, that pulling Baruth by himself obviously is a little bit of a time loss, because you're just sitting here barely being able to pull anything else on top, just because of how difficult it is to deal with that healing reduction. But yeah, definitely a good choice, I believe, to go with the safer route here, especially because they are so far ahead compared to the other team.
So here I think they're actually pulling it all the way to the boss, which is also a risky pull, but however they do have lust here, but I'm not sure if they'll pop it here. But it's definitely a scary pull, especially with Necrotic, because these stacks are going to ramp up so quickly, and they're not going to be able to heal the tank much. So when all this damage is coming in, especially fortified mobs hitting so difficult, it's going to be quite scary, I think, if they're not careful here. But I think the Ashen's just gone down, so I think the HP is going to come out with some huge damage and help get those mobs down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so the ring actually came up a bit early here from the Windwalker. It's going to be hard for them to get the Sanguine away from the boss. Let's keep an eye on the boss. Oh, it's actually healing a little bit right there. Did manage to drag it out now. So just 1 tick went off there. But there's still going to be 2 Gargants plus a Dark Blade that are going to die in just a second. Need to make sure that the boss is out of there. Because sometimes this boss just stands still and casts. Like right now, the Anima Fountain being casted. But thankfully, the tank saw that the Anima Fountain is being casted and made sure that the mobs are dragged away. Looks like, yeah, okay. Oh, this was so close. I'm always just like hoping that it doesn't heal, because it's just so heartbreaking to see a boss heal to full HP standing in a Sanguine pool. But really good job by Baguette handling that.
Especially a boss that cast, you see the Sanguine underneath his feet and it's casting this long channel, and you're thinking, oh no, I cannot believe it's doing this. And your heart just drops a little bit as you watch the health continues to go up until you can drag it out. So it'd be absolutely devastating to see something like that happen to them. It's quite interesting
there's
to see
like nothing you can do either.
No.
Unfortunate.
But like the Collector's still up here, which is kind of interesting. You think that'd be dead by now considering everything else is gone, but they're sitting here with it. So I'm quite interested why it's still alive.
Yeah, it looked like maybe there was just an interrupt missing on the Collector as he was just standing there in the corner casting. Either it was an interrupt missing, or maybe it was outside of the room and maybe not targetable. Not really sure, but unfortunately their Roko's down here. They did manage to get the Battle Rest back up. So just the 5 seconds on the board, not really a big time loss here. Compared to, of course, the 21 deaths that we have on day 4 Danes, 1 Swede side. So once they're done with this boss here on Baguette, they can move on, deal with that mini-boss. A little bit of a damage check there as well, because it is fortified. So that mini-boss has a little bit more HP, but it is a 19, so they should be okay. They just want to make sure that they finish off this mini-boss before that the AoE cast goes out, this Dark Communion. Because if they don't kill it before the second cast, oh, they're even committing Bloodlust for it.
Oh, wow.
I guess they're unsure if they can make it, so they're just committing the last.
I mean, yeah, it's a big commitment to make too, though, because you lose so much time if you're not able to kill the Inquisitor. Because, as like you said, if it does heal up, that's time wasted. In this case, it'd be blood that's wasted if they couldn't do it. But I think that's why they'd bring up Lust, because they'll make sure that they 100% can pop their CDs on it and get that down.
Yeah, I think it makes sense if they're unsure, if they maybe don't have the cooldowns available that they normally do, or something else went wrong previously, then they just decide, you know what, let's just pop that last here. The last boss, of course, it would be nice if they have the last for the last boss, because it would be more efficient and a bigger time save to have it here on Lord Chamberlain. But if they don't make the damage check on the mini boss, that's going to be a much bigger time loss than what they're saving for lasting the last boss, right? So it was a good decision, I think, making sure they have that damage to get it down. Now they have to deal with the last boss. Still, as you can see with the debuffs here, they have the 2 Tormentor debuffs, the 50% slow plus the 50% physical damage increase. So as long as they dodge the statues, they should be fine.
Easier said than done, though, because you know the statues, they are quick, and the only way to tell if they're facing you is when they face you and then they fly at you. So you have to make sure you're watching the statues and seeing if they're looking in your direction. And I think there's actually a cast going off here. Quickly they avoided that and soaked in the end. That could have been absolutely terrible for a wipe for them. The slow here is going to be so difficult, especially with the AoE under Lord Chamberlain when it comes out, and just dodging all the statues running at them. So that's the only thing I could really think here that could be absolutely terrible for them.
Yeah, I think they're actually doing a pretty nice strategy. I think I like this. So what they're doing here is that they have everyone stack up completely, like even their mage, right? They have 4 melee players plus 1 ranged. And even though the mage could stand out, they still just have him stand on top of the boss, because then they know exactly where all of the statues are going to be thrown to, because they only get thrown at players. So if they know that every single person stands in the middle of the room, then as soon as they see the statue being thrown, they can just walk away away from the boss, and they're gonna be fine. So I really like this strategy where they don't really have to think about where the statue is gonna be thrown. They know exactly it's gonna be thrown at them.
So we see it, they actually do take the win here. Pretty easy, 100%, and only 1 death on the count, so that's great to see by Baguette.
Yeah, well, almost 17 minutes there for Baguette, so it's not the fastest time that we've seen, but still very clean execution, and that's what we want to be looking for in our lower bracket, because every death can really count. And the side of 4 Danes, 1 Swede there, Zyro, they were just racking them up.
Yeah, I don't know what was happening to 4 Danes, 1 Swede. If my best guess would be that because the observers were using the inky black potions, it made it more difficult for 4 Danes, 1 Swede to actually see what was going on in the dungeon. But actually, in all seriousness, one of the things I've noticed about 4 Danes, 1 Swede is that they did have to make a substitution after time trials. They swapped out one of their players for Harudra, who is an MDI veteran. He won the MDI 3 years ago. Like, the guy's a great player. But I wonder if that maybe didn't really help out that much with team synergy and whatnot, and they really just couldn't get enough practice in as a team before this tournament. Hopefully we can see him turn around these next couple matches. But on the other hand, Baguette, they had some good upsides. I mean, it was a relatively clean run overall. Only 1 death on the board, not that big of a deal. Just got a quick battle res out on him. Now, the question of whether or not it's fast enough to compete with the top-end teams is another thing entirely. I think that I'd put them kind of similar to how we view Obey Alliance versus the top teams. Obey Alliance, if they play one of the top-end teams and they play clean, they can capitalize on mistakes from the top-end teams, but if both teams play clean, they aren't going to be able to beat them. I'd put them 1 tier below Obey Alliance. Baguette could be the Obey Alliance to Obey Alliance. If that makes sense.
Okay, well, of course, just to clarify, the observers using inky black potions doesn't affect any of the players, but I don't know if I agree with that one at all, Zyro, because we're talking about if Obey Alliance goes up against these top teams, they won't be as fast or something like that, but they literally just took down Ambition. That was the number 4 seed, right?
But Ambition did wipe twice. I mean, that's what I'm saying. If they both play clean.
I agree that they had the wipe, but in that Sanguine Depths, especially because of the deaths that Ambition already had from just simple mistakes or little mistakes here or there before the wipe even happened, I think that Obey Alliance probably would have just taken that Sanguine Depths win either way, because their damage was just falling through the floor, and there was a 10-15 second difference in timing there. I don't know, put some respect on Obey Alliance's name, all right?
Agree to disagree.
Come on. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. They'll have plenty of opportunities to be able to prove themselves, but right now we're talking about 4 Danes, 1 Swede, and Baguette. And we were talking earlier as well, Callie, about some of the group compositions. You were specifically mentioning, not having the Warlock. What do you think or how do you think that started changing some of the pulls around for these teams as well?
Yes, obviously we didn't see them making as big of pulls that we did see with the Warlock, which is quite evident, but I think it did work out for their teams, how their comps worked out for them, how with the Ellie Shaman, as you can see, the Ellie Shaman did a lot of overall damage and was able to cleave with the bosses as well, with those big pulls into the bosses. So I think the compositions were made pretty well for the way that they designed the pulls in their routes.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen a lot of Ellie Shaman at all this season, Zyro, when last season it was like extremely popular. Why do you think that was?
I think it's just has to do with the difference between what teams are trying to accomplish last season. Last season, you had to do very specific pulls around prideful timings, which really hindered the amount of trash you could pull on top of bosses, which is something that Ellie Shaman would like to do, but is definitely worse at than other classes, like things that we've seen come up this season, like the Frost Mage, like the Subtlety Rogue, like the Destro Warlock, like the Affliction Warlock. It's still really good in terms of utility and AoE damage, but the biggest problem that Ellie Shaman has is its focused single target damage is extremely bad compared to most of our top-end specs. And again, our meta right now is pretty much funneled single target damage. That's why we're seeing the Sub Rogue, that's why we're seeing the Frost Mage, and they can't really compete in that front.
Yeah, I mean, especially when we're starting to look at our next map as well, Nagura Tyrannical, a 21 Plaguefall going to be coming at these teams next.
Yeah, Plaguefall always one of those dungeons where we see a lot of things go wrong, just because there's so many crazy pulls that you realistically can do, but they are prone to just, one mistake just wiping the whole team, things going wrong so quickly. We just saw it earlier where they pulled the first boss with a bunch of slimes, and the healer went down and just all spun out of control. They didn't manage to deal with the bursting stacks that happened out of these slimes as well. And then if you don't have those cooldowns available that you were committing the first time, then all of a sudden the bosses take too long, you don't have enough CC for the slimes, and things just can fall apart so quickly. So hopefully, I actually like the approach from Baguette that we saw in Halls, where they went a little bit smaller on most of their pulls, but they played really clean, right? They only had this one death in that whole run. So I do want to see that in Plaguefall as well from them. And hopefully we can also see a clean run from 4 Danes and 1 Swede too.
Yeah, I mean, 4 Danes, for example, this Plaguefall run was the third dungeon if 4 Danes was going to be going into that. So you got to think this is got to be more of like a priority for them. And, we've seen it just a number of times, Callie, where teams are making the priorities lower bracket runs, especially if they're able to drill down on 1 or 2 specific dungeons they know they're going to play a lot of.
No, absolutely. And it's just like having to make the decision between what ones you need to do is quite important, but to be able to bring yourselves back, especially because if you play these poorly, you're going to be eliminated. So taking that into consideration and playing the dungeons that you need to well is going to be very important for these teams.
Yep, and 4 Danes, 1 Swede. We were talking a little bit as well, Zyra, about some of the mix-up that they were having in their roster. Having Harudra, for example, coming into their team after time trials has got to be really nice for that bit of veterancy. But so far, a lot of their runs have just been huge amounts of deaths across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, there's only so much that one person can do, right? I feel like I don't know what the situation is with the team. I don't think any of us on the desk have any personal relationships with this team, so there's not a whole lot of information we have about them. But unless Harudra is taking on a super big mentor role and trying to help the entire team with their routes and stuff, I don't think replacing one player with a veteran player is going to make that much of an impact on your team. It might actually have a more negative impact because you lose your synergies and you lose all the practice you've already done with your other teammate.
Yeah, that's a good point too, is, we don't always talk enough about which players are really the big brains on the team versus which are the ones who is coming up with the strats, who's making, shot calls in the game and everything, and how impactful that can be for it. We were even seeing some talk Nagura as to Echo, for example, having, just the analyst side, and we saw now is kind of helping on the sidelines before he came back onto their roster just to be able to help them build routes, build strategies up.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and the thing that we just mentioned with Harudra joining this team, one thing that also could have happened maybe is that maybe Haruja is now coming in, wanting to be the one that maybe helps them out with strategies, maybe making calls even. If you have two people in one team that want to be like this, the leader of the strategies, and want to say, we're doing this, and then another person wants to do something different, then maybe that can cause some problems too. Or if you have two people that are trying to shot call at the same time, and then if you don't call the same thing, people don't know, okay, who am I listening to right now? Is it this call that we follow or the other call, right? So it definitely can cause some problems if you don't synergize really well with newer people that come in and they're also have a big voice and are calling things out. And having that outside person, a sixth player, to just call stuff for you, I think that might definitely be an interesting thing that we're going to see Echo do later, right? It's going to be Miras now that is going to be the sixth person basically helping them call out stuff. I think it might be interesting, but it could also cause confusion as well, as I talked about earlier, if there's multiple people speaking up. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, when you were competing as well, Callie, did you have just Myth or one person as your shot caller, or did everybody kind of try to compete and help out with that? Or not compete, but try to work together on that?
Yeah, so in our teams, we definitely had some people who are a lot more vocal than others, like myself. I wasn't very vocal, but Soulmate and Myth, they're always talking, especially the communication between tanks and healers are also so important, saying, oh, hey, I've got this available and whatnot. But then like the raid leading sort of thing, well, group leading, it really was down to Soulmate. And we did have other guildies as well that would always come in and help us, which I'm sure we've seen in other teams as well, with their friends coming in, say like, hey, have you tried this? What about if you do this? Or have you thought of this? And I think that's something that's like undervalued, because having an outsider perspective, even just to say like, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this right, is so important to have those things. And even my team, we just had someone sitting there being like, this is what you're doing, and this is what's happening next. And it's so helpful.
Yeah, I can totally see that being helpful, but now we see 4 Danes, 1 Swede, and Baguette are in Plaguefall, as this is going to be a really important match for 4 Danes, 1 Swede. If they don't win this one, then they're going to be eliminated, as we are in the lower bracket, and only one of those teams is going to go further in this lower bracket. So 4 Danes, 1 Swede, last chance of actually staying in. It looks like both of them did a pretty significant pull here with the Tormentor, Arkaleth, and a bunch of trash as well. So really difficult pulls from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see here, there's so much stuff on the ground. There's the flames on the ground, and then the stuff from the spores and the shrooms that are casting as well that you should need to be careful of. And there's bursting, so there's so much stuff that you're going to have to be paying attention to. And the good thing about having the Dwarf Racial is that it's another thing that you can use to get rid of bursting, because as you saw before, their stacks were getting really high, and they're losing so much health from the bursting stacks. So here they have, for example, the mage has a block, there's diffuse magic, and there's also, you can dispel it with block and things like that, and all those things are going to come handy in this key to make sure that they're not going to die from these bursting stacks. And as you can see, Baguette's already pulled the boss with the slimes, which you have to be careful, as in melee it's pretty difficult. And as you can see, I think our Fancy might have popped bubble here just to make sure that they're not getting hurt by the stacks that's underneath the feet on the boss.
Yeah, and it looks like both of them did also use their Bloodlust here, making sure they have a lot of damage for this boss because it is tyrannical. So this boss definitely can cause some issues if you just run out of CC, right? We see a little bit of a problem here with 16 bursting stacks on Dej and Mage here on 4 Days 1 Swede side. Did manage to dispel at the last second there before he went down. Didn't even have block available at that point. So I guess he would have had the pot tender, the Dreamweaver pot, in case he would have went down, but thankfully did recover. But yeah, just an issue on this boss because you have all of these slimes coming in, and the longer the boss takes, the more of these blobs you have, and then all of a sudden you're just running out of CC. We still see the Elemental Shaman on 4 Days 1 Swede side, while Baguette is just sticking to that Rogue, and the Rogue also providing that extra CC, right? Having that bind for one of the slimes is also going to be really valuable.
Absolutely. We also have Turn Evil by the Paladin, and it's quite interesting to see how they position themselves on this boss, because obviously they haven't pulled the Plague Belchers, so they need to be careful not to accidentally body pull them when they get knocked back from the boss. So that's something that I remember when I was even practicing in MDI, just being careful where you're getting knocked back from, because you do not want to pull another Plague Belcher, because you, like you said before, that's even more slimes to have, and to have to CC all those, and you will just run out, and eventually it's just going to go downhill from there.
Yeah, it's actually getting kind of close for Baguette here. You can see they're just moving closer and closer to the exit of the room here to make sure that even if the CC breaks from those ads, that the boss is not going to be reached by them. You see, there's only a a fear from the fear sigil from the Vengeance Demon Hunter that is going to run out in just a second. So they're going to have to use another CC to make sure it stays away. Looks like they did use Turn Evil from the Holy Paladin to deal with that. And 4 Days 1 Swede having some issues as their Elemental Shaman goes down. Looks like they used Ankh, so they still have their Battle Rest available.
Yeah, so as they're seeing it, it's even getting worse now with the mage going down, everyone's low health. You see the Dispel and the Shaman just to make sure they're not even dropping even lower, but that does put the Paladin in a really bad position because obviously they still have the debuff, so it's been ticking them down just as hard, so they have to be careful. It doesn't look that great, and I don't think they're going to use the res here because obviously the boss is at 2%, so it's not worth using. But it was definitely a scary moment for them that I think they had to be careful about. So here they're getting the res out on the mage as well, and the tank is already going to pull the next stuff and get the next pull ready.
Yeah, thankfully didn't lose too much from those deaths here. Still a little bit behind to Baguette, because Baguette is already working on that next trash pull. They didn't lose any sort of time, no deaths on the board, still very clean run by them, as they're dealing with this Plague Rock, as well as some of the other trash mobs here. Just need to get rid of these slimes, and then I can move on. If you look at the difference in comp, I think the Rogue definitely provides a little bit more, I would say, single target damage, right? Compared to the Elemental, who has huge AoE damage potential, can funnel a little bit, but Rogues usually are just that one DPS spec that in your group make sure they focus the high HP targets, making sure they're evening out the damage from the rest of the mobs that are a little bit lower, and then the Windwalker and the Frost Mage, they can really focus on AoEing, even though Frost Mage is also pretty good at evening out DPS. So we don't really have any affixes here like Bolstering or Inspiring where you would need that kind of focus damage, but a lot of the trash pulls in this dungeon have pretty different kinds of HPs. In the health pools from these mobs, so having that focus damage from the Frost Mage and the Rogue really does help.
Yeah, as you can see out here, like Dwarf Racial just came in handy for 4 Danes, 1 Swede. They all just popped their Racial to stop the bursting there, but I have noticed they do drop quite a lot. They do quite a lot of risky pulls for them that I feel like must have been pretty stressful in practicing because it's so close to being a wipe, really. But here they have putting Ashen on this pack here, which is pretty difficult pack. They're also freedoming the tank just to make sure he's not going to die from that slow, which the mobs put on him. And it's like such a tough pull, especially for melee, just because of them all getting their stacks. And they obviously don't have the Racial here, so they have to be careful with the bursting.
Yeah, I'm definitely not jealous of melee players here in this dungeon with all of those frontals and cleaves that you have to look out for. On top of that, these slimes, when they spawn, if you stand on one of those slimes as it spawns on you, it just almost immediately explodes. And it does a huge amount of damage as well. So yeah, definitely not envious of those, as they... I'm not sure if they're going to be skipping Oros here. We've seen most MDI teams skip this in Plaguefall. And yeah, it looks like Baguette is doing that as well. They're just going past the Tormentor. They don't want to deal with it at all. So that means they're going to have that 50% slow on the last boss. And now they're just skipping past to the mini-boss.
Yeah, as we've seen in this competition, a lot of the strategies have been just giving most of the Tormentors and playing the affixes with the last boss, but obviously this is a 21 Tyrannical, so the last boss is going to be very difficult, especially having the slow and the healing reduction and all of that. Like, it's going to make the last boss very scary, and it might be a risk that could pull off of them, make them take the win, but at the same time, if they wipe to something like being too slow and getting hit by a tentacle, that'd be devastating because they took that risk and they just lost the game because of that.
Yeah, it's definitely a high risk, high reward kind of decision that these teams have to make when it comes to these Tormentors. And then on top of that, you also have to think about the buff that you're getting from the power, right? But then Oro is the defensive Tormentor that gives you defensive power, which definitely is not something that speeds up your dungeon unless it somehow enables a pull that you wouldn't be able to do without the defensive power, but that is very rare. Usually you don't really see that happen. 4 Danes 1 Swede having a little bit of an issue with their pull here. We saw one death earlier. They did use the battle rest to get, I think it was Harudra who went down. Then they got Harudra up with the battle rest, but now their mage went down as well. So just having a little bit of an, like, just small mistakes here and there, just losing a bunch of players. Not any huge wipes that had that caused like a huge time loss, but still just 20 seconds on the board and already behind in dungeon speed compared to Baguette as well. Not looking too good for them right now.
No, absolutely. Like you said, they don't even have the res at the moment, and Baguette hasn't had any deaths. They do have the res, and they're on Dr. Icarus at the moment, so they're quite far ahead of 4 Danes, 1 Swede, which is honestly looking good for them, but you never know. There might be a comeback somewhere.
Yeah, definitely possible because there's still quite a few difficult pulls left for Baguette to do. So if they have any sort of bigger mistakes later on, then that's the point where 4 Danes and 1 Swede can catch up. Because as I said, the 4 deaths that they had on the board, none of them were like huge time losses. It was just like a couple of seconds here and there. So if Baguette does make one of those bigger mistakes where they maybe have a wipe on a boss or on like a bigger trash pull where they commit a lot of cooldowns, then that's definitely the point where 4 Danes, 1 Swede can still catch up. But we see Baguette now on Dr. Icarus as they're dealing with, looks like they're on their 2nd platform, and they dealt with the Plague Bomb, right? So they didn't do this strategy that we've seen a lot where basically they would just ignore the Plague Bomb and then just use their immunities to survive that explosion. They didn't go for that. They just said, you know what, we're not going to risk that. We're just going to kill that Plague Bomb and make sure we don't have to commit our immunities here.
Yep, and they might even potentially use their immunities later on, if we see, because they've CC'd the slime here, so they had a pretty free access to the bomb, and Offensive almost gets hit here by the things on the ground, so that was a little bit sketchy, but I wouldn't be surprised if later on we see them using their immunities just to burn the boss at the end to make it quicker, so they don't have to waste all that time on the bomb.
Yeah, looks like that's exactly what they're doing, as they just stick to the boss even though the bomb did spawn. Also use the Ring of Peace here to make sure that Congealed Slime is away from the boss, not applying that damage reduction aura to it. And then they also use the Turn Evil from the Paladin. Thankfully he still had enough mana to cast that, because he's pretty low on mana now. But it looks like they are fine. As 4 Danes, 1 Swede unfortunately just keep having more issues. They did pull the boss with a lot of trash here, and they lost 2 of their players. It looks like they're just going to try to reset the boss here, because they're not going to be able to finish it with those 2 deaths on the board.
Yeah, unfortunately, obviously, like the trash isn't going to reset, so wouldn't be surprised if the tank goes down here, but I think they might be alright if they get it done, but they're not using any of the B-reses, so I think they're just taking the reset to res up, because the monk is still alive, so that they can still kind of save the pull a little bit, but if the monk does die, it'd be quite unfortunate, because obviously they don't have someone that can just out of combat res them.
Yeah, that's sometimes an issue with these comps that they're running, because if you look at Baguette's comp, for example, the only outside combat resters that they have is the Paladin and the Monk. So if something happens to both of them, then they just kind of sit there and can't do anything unless they want to commit that battle rest, right? So definitely something you have to look out for as well, as Baguette is dealing with Varuth, so they're not going to have that 50% healing reduction on the last boss. I think this is a very good choice, because on that 21 tyrannical Stradama, there's just so much incoming damage with that healing rain, and if you're not perfectly coordinated with your group, then it's really, really difficult to deal with it, and it's such a high risk that something goes wrong.
And especially in that situation right now, obviously they probably know that they are quite ahead with the timing. They're about the same on trash, but they've killed the second boss, and 4 Danes, 1 Swede hasn't killed the second boss. So I think taking that in consideration here and thinking, right, let's play the more safe route and let's do the things that aren't risky, because if we keep going here, if we don't make these significant wipes, then they're looking to be the ones who are going to win.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such a solid run by Baguette too. They played so well in the halls as well. Of course, they didn't do any of those like super insane MDI pulls that we maybe see some of the higher seeded teams do. But Baguette, they're coming in here. This is the first time they're competing in the MDI, and they're the 15th seed from the time trials. So seeing a team like this actually perform so cleanly is exactly what I want to see from those teams, right? I don't think anyone expects them to clear a Plaguefell in like 12 minutes, right? Everyone kind of knows that if you're competing for the first time, you're not going to have any like super insane runs, and you're not going to beat Complexity's time or something like that. But seeing that they play clean and not have any like major mistakes is really impressive, and it looks like they're gearing up to do some pulls here in the next boss room as well. This is one of the most difficult rooms actually when it comes to trash.
Yeah, I mean, like we've seen some of these pull the boss with the boss Domina, but obviously the stealth things as well that are coming out, which you can see, they actually interrupted it here, which is good, because you don't want to have to put a CC or put a stun into that pack when there's so many other things you'd be spending it on. So actually, as you can see here, there's 2 sets of stealth things that are coming up. They're using the Frost Mage's utility here, and I'm not sure what they used there, but that was very good by them to be able to CC them both at the same time. It was definitely coordinated, because you wouldn't want them to go off and randomly one-shot someone, even though the rogue did just go down and the mage is in pod here. So even though it was a sketchy pull, they did have pulled it off, which is the important part. So I'm kind of glad here they didn't pull Domino with it, because if they did, they would have had to sacrifice a lot more to recover that pull.
Yeah, definitely good they didn't pull the boss here. That was a bit unfortunate. I think what happened is that the paladin tried to use blinding light on one of them, but then I think half of the spiderlings were like spawning outside of the arena, so the elevation was a bit different. And I think maybe the paladin didn't hit all of the stealthlings with his blinding light, but maybe he thought he did, and then some of them were just jumping around. It can be a bit tricky sometimes because they are of course stealthed, and if you use one of your CCs, like an AoE CC, you might think, oh, it hit all of them, but then it didn't because of some weird elevation issues, or maybe half of them are like line of sight or something like that. So definitely a little bit unfortunate, but did recover now as they're dealing with Domino Venom Blade. They also deal with that sniper that they had to seed before, because that sniper is just really annoying to deal with when you deal with the rest of the trash, because it just doesn't move. It's just standing there shooting, and you can't really get it to join you with the rest of the trash. So they just decided to deal with it with the boss.
I think 4 Danes once he's getting a little bit overwhelmed by the boss, Dr. Ickes here, because we're watching the healer was dead for such a long time, and then the slimes were all coming up and they were trying to ring the slimes away, but it just really wasn't working, and then the tank's gone down here. So I think that was a very close wipe. I'm pretty sure almost all the team members died just then, but I think they did kill the boss there, so thank God they did that, because that would have been a little bit sketchy and put them even further behind Baguette, who's about halfway through Domino Venom Blade.
Yeah, Baguette doing a good job. They're now up to the 2 deaths, of course, because what just happened with those stealthlings. But other than that, they're doing a great job dealing with Venom Blade here. They have that Bloodlust available, but very likely they are just trying to save it for the last boss, for Stradama, to make sure they're not getting too many infectious rain casts in one of those phases. And then one more thing to notice, that they don't actually have any battle rests left, because they did commit a battle rest for those 2 players that just went down. So that means that it's going to be still a little bit dangerous for them to deal with Stradama, because if anyone goes down there, they're just going to have to deal with the rest of the boss fight with 1 less player. So hopefully no mistakes for the rest of this dungeon.
No, as you can see, they're using the mage utility here actually is quite amazing, watching him like alter time, getting the things, and even blocking the stun. I feel like mages are so nice on this boss with the utility to bring, and just collecting the assassins as quick as possible. And they have taken it down here. No one's died yet for this. 83% trash, and they're going to go to the next room. But yeah, like you said, they'll have no reses, so it's going to be either very sketchy for them, or they can pull it off pretty cleanly. And they did kill Varuth, so they're not going to have the 50% healing reduction, which is going to make it so much safer for them. So hopefully they can do it well without any mistakes.
Yeah, let's hope so, as they also, I mean, they have the 2 Tormentor Divas, right? They have the physical damage increase and the 50% slow, which can also cause some issues, especially if you have a second tank at that spawns. If you don't manage to get her down fast enough into that first intermission phase, and you get that second tank at that spawns, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to get out of combat, and you're going to keep your 50% slow plus a physical debuff on you. Otherwise you would be able to get rid of it because the boss goes away, and that is like a timer you kind of want to beat with your DPS in the first phase. Hopefully they can do that, so they don't have to deal with that slow in the intermission. It's really annoying because you have to dodge those tentacles, and then you just like you know, walking like a snail trying to dodge them. So hopefully they're gonna be fun as they're dealing with this last couple of trash packs here and the mini boss Iker before the boss spawns.
Yeah, I know it's like terrifying when you're getting slowed and the tentacles coming down, and you know when you've made that mistake, when you went the wrong way and you're thinking, oh, I'm done for here, and you're telling like, I need a res, someone needs to res me, I already know I'm going down, and you're just watching the tentacles come down one by one, about to take you out, and it's the worst feeling ever. So hopefully none of them make mistakes that I usually do in my weekly keys of going the wrong way when they're slowed, but we'll never know. That'd be terrible if that was the case.
I mean, just use your Ankh. Ankh is basically a defensive, right? That's the shaman's defensive. So
that's what I tell my raid leader. I tell him,
that's a problem.
Do not worry. My defensive may be on CD, but Ankh is not. It is coming. Do not stress.
Alright, so it looks like Baguette is now engaging Warcraft Shadowlands. You can see the debuffs on their player frame, so they're gonna have those two slows, plus also the physical increase. Looks like they have a decent amount of damage. I don't want to say they have too much. They might be getting a second ed here. You can see Stradama still on 73%, and the second tank ed is gonna just spawn in a second. Don't think they're gonna beat the timer. Actually, oh, never mind. I lied. They beat the timer. There we go. They're not gonna have the physical ed. That means if you look at the frames now, that both the Paladin and the Rogue, they're not actually incumbent with any of these devoted ads. So that means that they don't have those Tormentor debuffs on them. The mage decided to attack the devoted ads and therefore has the debuff. Well, that's fine because he's a mage, you know, and he has double blink, so he's gonna be fine.
Yeah, and that's we have to keep in mind that all these classes do, even though it is the slow, which makes it very difficult, you do have freedom from the Paladin, probably Tiger's Lust from the Monk, and the Rogue has mobility, the mage has blink, and I feel like they all have utility to make sure that they're not going to get too slow by this, so it's honestly like a good choice by them to be able to skip that Tormentor and take it with this boss.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's definitely a good choice by them. Definitely not too risky compared to some of the other Tormentors that they could have here. I mean, the 50% healing reduction, definitely a lot riskier that they decided to just not deal with here. As they're now in the second intermission. And yeah, I mean, at this point, it's very clear that the Baguette is going to be the team that just played cleaner, really. Like, Baguette really showing off today. Yesterday, they had some issues as well. But today, they're really, like, showing up. They are not having any of those issues anymore. Those 2 deaths on the board, we're just going to say those were unlucky. And other than that, they did really well as they're about to finish off Margaret Sadama here. Unfortunately, though, that means that 4 days, 1 Swede is going to be eliminated because, of course, we are in the lower bracket here. And whichever team loses in the lower bracket is going to be out. You only get a 1 second chance and not a second chance. So unfortunately 4 days 1 Swede didn't play well enough today, but Baguette is going to be the ones that are moving on. But the next team they have to play against is Ambition. So that's a little bit unfortunate for them, I'm going to have to say.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be good to see.
Congratulations to Baguette, rising through the ranks here, taking that victory over 4 Danes, 1 Swede. But yeah, as you mentioned,